just to jump in, and like I said, we'll see who else joins in. One, Sue, I hope you're doing okay, and Carol, I hope you're doing okay. How are you each like rebounding slowly, recovering slowly? Slowly, yep. Slowly but
Yes.
surely.
Yeah, I'm in rehab. I'm getting there. I have to wear this for another month.
Another month.
Yeah. And if it doesn't heal, then I'll need a shoulder replacement.
Okay.
So
all your slaps come from the right side or left side now?
Well, from the right side.
From the right side.
But I'm left-handed. That's what's bad.
That's why I just have to know which side to avoid if I'm going to say something sketchy to you. All right. So, okay. Excuse me. So, as we dive in this week, we are in chapters. So we left off with chapters 7 and 8 is where we would be at. I also went into myself a little bit into chapter 9 just to, because I don't know how it's going to play out. If we get through chapters 7 and 8 tonight, then next week would be theoretically either way the final class, because it'll be chapter 9. So if that happens, we get through 7 and 8 tonight. Next week we'll do chapter 9 and maybe like any follow-up or like any questions to just kind of summarize things. If we only get through part of 1 tonight, we'll do that. If we get through 7, 8, and 9 tonight, then we'll make next week kind of a follow-up, wrap-up session. So I just noticed my hair is getting long because I haven't tried to shave it, and I haven't asked Melissa to. I'm going to have a ponytail by the time I come back to church. Ponytail for Palm Sunday. All right. So is there, excuse me, does anybody want to start off with anything from chapter 7? What was chapter 7 titled, if you have a copy of the book?
Gladness.
Gladness. All right. Thank you, Carol. Gladness. So are there any stories that jumped out to anybody from this, from chapter 8? And is the iPad charged by chance or no? Okay. Anything from Gladness? Did anybody read chapter 7?
Well, they looked at the happy side, the funny side.
The happy side, the funny side. Okay. So what about the happy side? Because when I think of gangsters, I don't typically think of the happy or funny side, unless it's like a Dick Tracy comic, which is a completely different situation. So does anybody have like just like an initial thing just to get us jump started? We're working with technology. No. Okay, I'm just talking. I am just talking.
You're good.
I am good.
Anal blindness.
Anal blindness. Mm-hmm. I definitely highlighted that in my book, anal blindness. And the first time I read that, all right, so for those of you, if you did read that, hopefully that jogs your memory. If you didn't read it, then maybe this will kind of spark this for you. Did you know, Carol or anybody else, did you know what anal blindness was before they explained it?
No.
Had you ever heard the phrase anal blindness before?
No.
Yeah, neither had I. And so I'm like, I remember reading it going like, anal blindness. And I thought it was, because throughout the book and even these chapters, there are points where they say the wrong thing. Like they mean one thing, but they say something completely different. Just because whether they don't have the education or the experience with it. And so when I came across that anal blindness, I thought, oh man, this guy messed something else up, doesn't know the right thing to say. And then when I kept reading and I realized what he was saying, I remember reading it for the first time like a year and a half ago going, I need to start using that phrase more often. And I have not done it. And every time I come across it again, I'm like, I really need to start saying anal blindness. So who wants to elaborate on what, so this, this guy calls in and he says he's suffering from anal blindness. And what that means is what? What can't he do?
Can't go into work that day.
Yeah, Carol, but I feel like you cleaned it up a little bit.
Yeah, I did.
You could just say, I don't think I'm coming in. So you can't say it?
See my ass coming to work.
Yeah, I can't see my ass coming into work today. That is brilliant. Now, in most jobs, I'm gonna put this out there. In most jobs, if you told your boss, either one, that you had anal blindness, or two, if you then explained what anal blindness was, how do you think that would go over in most jobs?
I don't think they'd like it. I think they'd
You don't. I don't think they'd like it. So you were a teacher, Carol. If you would have called in the principal, if you would have called in the principal and said, "Hey, I think I have anal blindness," it would not have gone over well.
No. She would have thought I was being disrespectful.
Heather says, very disrespectful. Is that the way Father Greg takes it, though?
No.
Do you guys think he takes it being disrespectful? I don't think so either. I think he took it as being kind of creative and imaginative, and I'm sure he would have wanted the guy to come to work, and he probably had some words for him the next time he saw him. I'm trying to think of, I can't remember exactly what happened, but 2 years ago when I was teaching at the middle school, this isn't going to be exactly it, but a couple of years ago I was teaching at the middle school, and I wanted the kids to write a summary on, let's say, Gospel of John chapter 13. And I said, please get a piece of paper out and write a summary of John 13, and then we'll go over it. And I gave the kids like a half hour to start on like whatever verses I'd asked them to do in John 13. And so they're sitting there, they're working, they're writing. The time ends. And I'm like, all right, everybody bring them up just so I can look at them real quick, and then we'll go over them. And they come up, and I won't say the kid's name because every once in a while he stumbles across something I do online. And on his page, he wrote literally a summary of John 13, whatever the verses were. He just wrote the phrase I said, please write a summary of John, and he just wrote that down. And I kind of like this Father G moment. I started laughing because I thought, well, I technically did ask them to write a summary of John 13, and he wrote exactly what I told them to write. He didn't write he didn't actually do the job, but he did what I told him to do. And so the kid had some other issues we ended up working through, but it made me laugh more so than anything. And then he was told to go and do it the right way. But I didn't get mad at him. I was like, technically, you did what I told you to do. All right. So we have that. Is that okay? Awesome. I didn't want that. All right. So I'm going to try to pull up the book on my iPad so I can look at it as well. Okay.
You want the chat or not?
No, if you can tell me what's happening on Facebook, that would be great.
No, this is, I mean, the Zoom chat.
Oh, no, I can see it when it pops up. All right. So let me.
Barb and Ryan are with us on Facebook.
Barb and Ryan, hello, people. All right. So gladness. Okay, so according to this, and you have to do some diving because you guys are not super chatty. And that, I don't know if that's because everyone can see either your faces or hear your voices, and there's a much more, even though we're not together, it's much more immediate tonight. I'm going to go over what I have highlighted in my book, and I'm going to ask you guys to chime in. Okay. So according to, this goes back to the beginning of chapter 7, according to the American poet, William Carlos Williams, he makes a comment about if it ain't a pleasure, it ain't a poem. And do we all know, like within a religious order, do we know what a novice is? So when it says my director of novices, do we know what a novice is? Does anybody want me to explain what a novice is in a religious order? Does anyone want to give a definition of a novice? Am I muted? Does anybody want to Google novice?
Somebody's new at doing something.
Yes. So if you're a novice, yeah, you would say somebody who's new at
You're a
doing stuff.
newbie.
Are a newbie, yeah. So for religious orders, a novice is somebody who is new. So they can be like if you're inquiring, or if you're just getting started in something, one of the terms would be a postulant, somebody who's thinking about potentially entering into an order. And then a novice is somebody who's new, who's kind of trying it out. They're not a full-fledged member yet. They're kind of like living the life, but they don't have the same rights as somebody who's completely in the religious order, nor do they have the same responsibilities and expectations as somebody who's in a religious order. So he says, my director of novices used to say this, and I thought this was beautiful. I highlighted it. Why did God create us? According to Leo Rock, who was the director of novices for the Jesuits that Father Greg worked under. Why did God create us?
I haven't found the spot, but wasn't it for God's enjoyment?
Very close, very close. So it's in the first paragraph of chapter 7. Sue almost had it exactly, but there's a slight difference.
God created us because he thought we'd enjoy it.
So,
Oh yeah.
because we'd enjoy it. It's a slight change, but it's a big change. So God created us because he thought that we would enjoy being created. Now, I want us to think about that in conjunction with the context that Father Greg is coming from. You know, that and the type of lives a lot of these people are living, that we would enjoy it. So if I were to say to you, if I were to say, hey, we need to, I'm going to take you, I'm going to transplant you. We're going to do like undercover boss. But instead you're going to be undercover gang member. All right. And I'm going to put you into one of the gangs near where Father Greg is living and working. And you're just going to live the life of a gang member for a week. Do you think you'd enjoy that?
No, not at all. You know, it'd be pretty scary.
Yeah, that's a very polite and calm way of putting that. Yeah, a bunch of middle-class white people going and going and living that life, when we had, probably most of us had very, very little experience with that style of life. And we may have been exposed to it in a variety of through media or through ministry type work, but actually living it day in, day out. And I would say, a lot of the stories we read, it doesn't sound like the people are necessarily enjoying it either. Like, there are times of enjoyment, but as we mentioned like a week or so ago, if you're a young woman in that community and you have a child at 16 because you're afraid you're going to be dead by the time you're 20, how is that enjoying life? How do those two things exist? So, but I still think there is something to that statement. God created us because he thought we'd enjoy it. So when it stayed that way, what is, if we accept that to be true, let's just work with that for a second. If we accept this to be truth, God created us because he thought we'd enjoy it. What's the purpose of creation and existence then?
For us to enjoy life.
Yeah. I heard you whisper it. Sin boldly, Sue.
For us to enjoy life.
Yeah. God created things for our enjoyment. Would you disagree with that? If I came out and said, I think God created existence so that we would have enjoyment, raise your hand if you would say, yeah, I think that's why creation exists.
I think so. I think some of the things he created, like when the beautiful scenery and the mountains, that you see, and all this part of around us, the beauty part of the world. Yeah, there's enjoyment in that.
Okay. Okay. Judy, you had your hand up as well.
In fact, not that I think us as people have taken away a lot of that enjoyment. I think that things that are going on right now in the world, it's people that are causing what's going on in the Ukraine, not the world. It's the people that are causing that.
Right. Right. So, okay. Yeah, I agree with that. All right. MedSearch, aka Judy, states, given all this great enjoyment, God's given us all this beauty. And I apologize to anybody who's on Facebook right now if you're leaving comments, because
I watched it fine.
my monitor is watching and she's going to help me out with that. Yeah. And do you think there's any, so, with what Dale just said over, the things that happen in this world, and then the negativity of this world is the result of us, not the result of God. You don't know how to use the microphone? Everybody, just so you know, she just marked a milestone age back in February, and I'm pretty sure before that she knew how to work a microphone, and I think they took away her privileges of understanding technology after she turned that certain age. So is there a time let me change this question. Would it be out of the realm of possibility, or how would you feel if somebody who lived in the situation in the context that where Father Greg is working and ministering, or in the Ukraine right now, or in our towns and communities, the people that, someone struggling with mental illness, or somebody who, from the outside, everything looks fine. But there's something, there's abuse or whatever going on inside the home. For when people take that, live in those experiences, and you were to say to them, oh, well, that's just our fault. God made everything so we could enjoy it. How do we take that belief that God made creation because he thought we'd enjoy it, and make it useful in a way that does not diminish people's experiences, or kind of, I don't know, just diminish them and minimize, like, oh, well, I'm sorry, your life is horrible, but, God made it. That's people's fault. How do you say that phrase in front of someone who is just suffering or struggling or hurting?
Well, I think you use empathy with them, but the way around that is, people can also help other people. Like you mentioned, mental illness or a problem in the home. There's ways for other people to continue to help those people through those situations.
Okay. So what responsibility, so Judy writes, God is love. The people in Ukraine still maintain love for each other in the country, an example of that love. Okay. What responsibility do we have as people that love God that acknowledge God and love God to make God's intentions for the world a reality. So if God's intention for the world is to create a place where we have enjoyment, what responsibility, if any, do we have in helping perpetuate that or create it, instill it? Are we partners in that? Do we have no responsibility?
We've been commanded to do that.
Right.
We've been commanded to do that, to love one another, to share God's love with one another.
Right. Right. And in that what I was referencing, I don't know if it was John 13, I know that comes up for Monday, Thursday, and you shall love, that's one of my favorite verses, they shall know that you're my followers because of, how you love people. There's got to be a way for us to take this belief, to hold on to this belief, because if we don't have it, in my mind, it really, I don't know how you go forward personally, but to take this belief that God created creation for us because he thought we'd have enjoyment in it. We realize that there are people that aren't experiencing this. We realize there's pain, we realize there's suffering caused by us, but we don't want to add to that. We want to acknowledge it, but then move forward in a more loving, as I saw comments, more loving and inclusive direction, as opposed to so is there, all right, I'm gonna ask a question here, and this is one of those ones where I get like a little tingling spidey sense. All right, so I'm fully aware of this, and I will just mute everyone if it goes sideways, because I think I have that power. Something I've wrestled with over the last couple of years, because of COVID, has really put this in the forefront of my mind. And I think this book talks about it as well in a different way, is how do we reconcile the idea that we have individual freedoms and liberties, is what we profess as Americans, and that our nation is kind of built upon that. How do we reconcile that with looking out for the good of others and the good of all people? So if it comes down to my personal freedom versus the health, inclusion, love of somebody else, and one of those is going to win, which one wins? Which one should win? That's something I've struggled with. I mean, I know what my position is, but I've seen our country really wrestle with this over the last couple of years. Does anybody have, does anybody have any thoughts on that without going too far down the rabbit hole that's going to get me?
I think we, as a country, not just with the pandemic, but we have laws to protect others. I mean, there's things that we as a country, we are a democracy, we're free, but in order to protect our neighbor, we have to follow certain rules.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all, so that's, I guess, what we're trying to say here is to protect our fellow man and our fellow neighbor, we have to follow some rules. That goes whether COVID or anything else in life.
Yeah, I like that, Dale. And Heather or Rob, Heather's avatar Rob, or Heather and Rob. Heather's saying, no, it's me. Love should win every time, sharing love and support. Yeah, I guess, and that's where the struggle for me and what I've seen play out is, so if we're saying that God created existence because God thought it would make us happy, what if my happiness potentially causes pain to somebody else? What if what brings me joy or happiness will infringe on somebody else's happiness? Do we, how do we manage that? How do they, because my guess, and I'm going to go off of what I preached a month and a half ago, I've been praying for people that I don't agree with. And I would say my guess is that Putin would be extremely happy if the Ukraine just said, yeah, no, you can take us over. That would make him happy. It'd be his enjoyment. And yet for the people of Ukraine go, yeah, we don't want that, so it's, I guess, is it more important then, and we'll move after this, is it more important for us to be focused more on, if we had to default to one, focus more on others or focus more on ourselves?
I think we have to focus more on others. I mean, if everybody took that approach, everybody, I'm saying,
Right. Yeah.
then yeah, it would be a better place. If everybody 100% though had to buy into it, that's the key,
That's the key. And that's the
Yeah.
hard part. That's the
Yeah.
hard part, because it just takes one and you go, well, that's difficult. Let's see what Kim has here.
And you mentioned something about praying, and I think I saw that this morning in our daily devotion book.
Mhm.
I have a problem if I had to pray for Putin. I'm just saying. Or there's others out there. That's the one now. But I think, and I thought of that. I thought, well, this is saying, people that you. And I thought, how can I do that? It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is very hard. And that's why I think we keep coming back. Like, so Father G represents a lot in this book. The people he interacts with, the people that volunteer and work with him represent a lot of this goodness. And obviously we go back to Jesus saying, if he's on the cross saying, forgive them, there's how do I hold somebody else up and say, don't forgive them? So yeah, it's very difficult. So Kim, is this Patton or Hilden, or is this Patton and Hilden together? It's Hilden Haha. All right, it's like mini Haha. It's like the Lake Mini Haha. It's the Kim from Hilden Haha. If you can't see the chat, then you're not gonna know why I'm making these jokes. Okay, so Kim says, I think a focus on others leads to a personal joy. Yeah, I can see that. And that's going to come up in the next story I'm going to reference. And Judy says, yeah, let's dance. Who's ready to get some? I don't know. That was awesome.
That's an alert.
That was an alert. Someone's about to get funky. Was that a funky alert? Is it, what time is it? It's funky o'clock, whatever it is. Keep ourselves in check, not get too high and mighty, which is very true. So if you go to, I don't know what page it's on, because on my thing it's shows it differently, but still in chapter 7, he gets into talking about the guy Spider, I think. Yeah, Spider. And he's talking about how Spider's worked, and he's like the head of the warehouse and everything now, I think. And or no, he lives. No, that's wrong. But he has his wife. He has 2 small sons. They live in an apartment in Highland Park, several bus rides away. And he takes him home. And what does Spider tell him he's going to do when he gets home? I think this is obviously a really powerful story. So he says, "Get in, dog. I'll take you home." And then he says, "We speak of many things as we go, and I question him about his bills and rent, how he's faring. I've helped him get jump-started in this regard a few times already." And he says, "I'm okay." And then he goes in a completely different direction. Who would like to help share that? His kids eat first. Yeah. So he sits down with his wife, with his lady, and his 2 kids.
He wanted to watch his children eat.
Yeah. He wants to watch them eat. And then he says, and then he'll eat. However, what's the reality when he does that? If he doesn't eat first,
There might not be enough for himself.
there might not be enough for himself. Is that okay with him?
Yes,
Yep.
because of the joy he gets in seeing his children eat
Yeah.
and be
It's so, as Kim kind of referenced earlier, this idea of, our thinking of others being a personal joy for us. I mean, for all of us here who've, had kids, or been around, have loved other people, to a point now where in my life where, and I'm sure it'll be even different, and hopefully not at least 10 more years, but we'll see, of, Christmas morning. Do I like the fact that I get a couple gifts? That I get some gifts? Yeah, I do. But that's not what brings me happiness on Christmas. It's seeing the kids open their gifts. It's seeing their happiness and their joy is what actually makes me happy. It is also seeing some of the gifts because I don't know what most of the gifts they're getting are until they open them, because Melissa buys most of them. But there's just that sense of their happiness becomes my happiness. And what I think is great there in what Spider says, he goes, as Judy pointed out, it's a dad thing, it's a father thing. And then he says, the duty to delight is to stare at your family as they eat, anchored in the surest kind of gratitude. And the sort that erases sacrifice and hardship and absorbs everything else. So if you were even to ask this guy, Spider, would he be looking at this experience of watching his family eat? Would he say, yeah, we might not have enough food, so I might not be able to eat, and that's a hardship? Or, yeah, if they eat all the food, it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Is Spider even looking at it from those perspectives?
No.
How is he approaching? He's not approaching it as like, well, I guess I'm going to sacrifice for him. He's looking at it as, I would say, if going back up to that line, he's a privilege. He's looking at the situation with gratitude, because who is he not thinking of? Himself. If he's thinking of himself, then he might look at, man, why don't we have more food? Or, man, I can't believe they're going to get food, and I guess I love them, so I'm going to sacrifice for them. Instead, he's just thankful that they have enough. So he's not thinking of himself, which I think is a beautiful thing. Yeah, his joy is watching those he loves and knowing that he's provided for them. Yeah, I think that's it's a very, very beautiful thing. And in a line after that, what I love, it's just he throws in, Father Greg throws in these lines every once in a while that I'm just like, man, he just said that, and then he just moves on. So Jesus says, my ways are not your ways. That's the phrase, that's the quote. Jesus says, my ways are not your ways, but they sure could be. Because what creates that? Who's in charge of the view of how that meal is unfolding? So you have Spider, you have his wife, and you have his 2 kids. And Spider looks at it and just is grateful that his kids are happy, that they have food, his kids, his wife have food to eat. Who's in charge of that perception for Spider?
Well, Spider is.
Yes, sir.
Him, yeah.
Could he take a tone that goes, man, I have to sacrifice for you guys. I go to work all day. I buy the food. I come home, and now you eat it, and now there's not even any left for me. He could take that approach.
Yeah.
He could, but he chooses not to.
Exactly. He chooses not to, because that's his priority. He has chosen to make that not his priority. His priority is God himself, but others. And I think so we are in charge of, there's so much we're not in charge of, but we can be that, Jesus, his ways are not our ways, but they could be. We are in charge of how we perceive things, how we approach things. And it's difficult, and we have to go back to the beginning over and over and over again. We mess up a lot, but that is the goal. Or if we go to the next page or so, this is one of those things that gets me. So for those of you who don't know me as well, those of you who think you know me, let me put it that way. Those of you who think, little insight, little treat for anybody who's here tonight or watching Facebook or who sends this to anybody else. So I think I might have mentioned this in this room one time. I'm very big, like I'm very sappy, sensitive person. From the time I was little, like 6 or 7 years old, I was like serious, sentimental movies and crying over them. You know, my dad would be like, "Why are you doing that? That's not, this is not stuff you're meant to be dealing with yet." But it's just stuff that's always that the empathic, sympathetic, compassionate mindset has always been there. So in that next story, he's talking about how his father had a brain tumor, and in 30 days from the moment he found out he had a brain tumor till he died. And he sees his mom coming. He goes to pick up his mom to take his mom to the hospital. And this is just like one of those heart-wrenching stories. So he picks up his mom, and she comes out of the house, and what does she have with her?
Her pillow.
Her pillow. And he's like, "Hey, I don't know if you know this, but they have pillows at the hospital." And she's like, no, he wanted one of my pillows. And so they get there, and they are not overly affectionate. They give like a little simple kiss. And then she goes off to the bathroom, and then he goes to talk to his dad about something. And when he looks over at his dad, what is his dad doing?
Has the pillow on his face so he could smell her.
Yeah, he's just breathing her in. And then he puts the pillow behind his head. So for him, it's not about the pillow really at all. What is it about?
The smell.
Yeah, it's about her.
Yep.
And he said, throughout the rest of the morning, you can see his dad just every once in a while, like stealing away a smell. He says, the woman whose bed he shared for nearly half a century. And then Father Greg says, then we exhale, for that breath has to go somewhere, to breathe into the world the same spirit of delight, confident that this is God's only agenda. That comes back to that delight and enjoyment of why creation exists. What for the next story, they talk about one of these what do they call it? You've seen these. We've all seen these. We're not Catholic. At least I don't think most of us are Catholic or aren't, at least currently. But we've seen these like holy images. So he tells us a story about there's a lady who starts talking about there's a woman who the Virgin Mary showed up on her tortilla. And the one woman kind of views this as like, oh my gosh, the Virgin Mary showed up on tortilla, and she is not happy with the way we're living our lives. And she just absolutely just saying that we're going to hell in the hand basket or bag or whatever the phrase is. And so he just lets her talk, which I've done that. You've all probably done this in your variety of settings that you guys work or interact. You've all had the person that you've been around. You've probably been the person too. I know I've been the person, but all have the experience like where you're sitting around talking with a group of people, and then all of a sudden, somebody starts talking, and you're like, ooh, I don't like where this is going at all. And you just kind of let them ride it out. You're like, all right, well, it's not really my place to fix this. But so he's just like, I'm just going to let her talk. And so she does this rant about how upset God is with the world and how everyone condemned and all this stuff. And obviously because of that, that's why the Virgin Mary showed up on a tortilla. So what is the response? So if this were me and we were having a discussion, we were in a book study or Bible study, somebody just starts talking about this tortilla, I don't know if I could have made the response. But it takes another woman, one of her peers within the church, to say what to her? So what is her response? It's one of the next stories. Hi, Melanie. It's one of the next responses. So it's like the woman sees the Virgin Mary on a tortilla, and then another woman says to her, Pero te digo una cosa, Dios no es así. Now, I only know what that means because she translates it after that.
Tell you one thing, God is not like that.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing, God is not like that. So it says Socorro knew the opposite of God when she saw it. So how do you think you have personally done a good job? I know we're all sinners. We've already established that. And we all need God's grace. But that's not not the point of this question. Do you think you've done a good job in your life when you've been around people that have made God out to be some type of punitive being that's filled with anger and rage or what have you, of saying, that's not how I see God, or I don't think God is like that? Or do you think, or have you tended to be, and there's no judgment here, because I know I've fallen silent way more than I would want to admit. Do we instead fall silent and just kind of let the person talk and go, bless you, and say, well, I guess that's their opinion. I'm not going to change their mind. That's what they believe. Or do we speak up?
I think I was about confirmation age,
Mhm.
and I was very concerned about a 6th grade teacher not believing God, not believing. And I talked to a pastor about this, and the pastor said, well, just tell him he's going to hell.
Oh, dear
I
Lord.
never did tell him that, but I think maybe that was what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Slamming a person with God.
Yeah. Using God as so it's like this weird thing, because it can, there's part within scripture where we would say, is the word of God a weapon? And I would say, like against evil, and if you want to personify it, if you want to say the devil or whatever, is the word of God meant to be something that attacks evil and is against evil? I'm going to keep going. It's all right. I would say, yeah, it is. But I don't know if I have a hard time believing that God's word is supposed to attack other people.
Yeah.
And so, Sue, at your young age, you responded by, like, you were going looking for inspiration, guidance, advice.
Yes.
You went to the person who you thought would be a really good person to provide that to you.
Right.
And their response, what it was. And
Yes.
you, in your 6th grade mind, went, yeah, I don't think so.
I think I was in shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that probably in my life, I mean, obviously with what I do, it plays out, it's so much of the focus of my life is on this area. But I've never, well, they don't believe in God. But even with people that do not have a faith that they discuss, or openly share, or even feel like they possess it, I don't see them going on necessarily condemning people like that. and I'm not saying that's necessarily the right way, but obviously I would love if they believed in all of that. But there's just something to, when I see Christians just hurting other people, it confuses me because it's just not my experience of God. I'm going to get to you in a second, Melanie. So Judy says, as a child, our family attended a church that preached of an angry God. We didn't go back, which just upset God more, if we're going to be honest, Judy. They preached about an angry God. You didn't go back, and God got angrier. Went to another church where they preached about an angrier God. You wanted the angriest God you could get, Western Pennsylvania. So it depends on the situation. At the moment, allows for discussion. We have the views. Okay, share your views. If it's a sermon, yeah, I sure hope you don't interrupt my sermon. Or a person, yeah. And if I ever preach a message like that, please actually do interrupt me, because something has gone horribly wrong in my brain and I need to be stopped.
I wasn't so much thinking that it was your sermon.
I thought it was still Heather there. I was like, all right, Heather, you're going to interrupt me? That is, yeah. It says Rob. I didn't get to that part, Rob, where it said Rob. All right. It is going to land on deaf ears. All right. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. So remember deaf ears if I don't come back to that. Melanie, you had your hand up. What would you like to share? And you're muted right now, so you can unmute yourself. If you don't want to unmute yourself, you don't have to. If you accidentally raised your hand, that's fine. But I have no way of knowing, Melanie. If you stepped away from the computer, if you want me to keep guessing, don't do anything. All right. So Melanie, if you come back into this, I want to hear your thoughts. I'm going to go back to the deaf ears idea with Rob. And so it's nothing that I disagree with Rob. Melanie says continue. I'm going to come back to you, Melanie. Because I completely get that, Rob, and that is my approach most of the time, is like, well, this person, we won't be entering, if I say something to this person, we're not entering into a conversation. That's not a dialogue. This person has told me what they believe. There's not a chance of any change or interaction. It's more of just a one-way street. And so I don't say anything. Do you think there's a detriment to Rob or anybody else? Do you think there's a detriment to, even in that situation, not saying, at the very least, I hear what you're saying, I just don't think God is like that? Or is it smarter just to walk away?
Again, I think this is very situation dependent, and it requires a little bit of that discernment and maybe godly wisdom. And sometimes maybe just saying something will plant a seed that will grow that you might never see. On the other hand, it might just reinforce their belief and actually make it that much more hardened. And I don't know if we always have the wisdom to know which way it'll go. So if it's in that moment, maybe it's just a quick prayer to God to go, help me on this one. And just, and whatever your gut reaction is, go with it and leave it in his hands.
That's probably always the best thing, Rob. Like a little quick, hey, can you help me out with this one? I told Joanna, Brenda's daughter, and I don't know if I share this with anybody else. So like every week, before like a worship service, if you pay attention to it, so like I'll go up, prelude ends, I face the altar for a brief moment, then I turn around. And when I do that, when I'm turning facing the altar, you can't see me, I'm making the sign of the cross, and I'm always saying this simple phrase is what I've been saying for 16 plus years, is God, don't let me screw this up. And it's like, God, don't let me screw this up. And there are quite a few times I've come back to God pretty quickly because I've messed something up, in a short matter of time. I'm like, where were you? Like, I just asked you to not let me mess this up. And that's already went sideways. So that discernment is, is always best, and there's always exceptions to the rule. I guess for me, I probably, and maybe just because these are the ones that just stick with me. The ones that stick with me more are the ones where I go, man, maybe I should have said something. Maybe I should have said something, and I didn't. And if I could have that back, what would I say? What would I do? All right, Melanie, I want to see. Did you want to say anything, Melanie? Did you not want to say anything? You want me to just keep saying your name? I can sing it if you want. Melanie, Melanie, Melanie. So people showed up. I will. Oh, Melanie was out of the room. She's back in. There's two Melanies now. We doubled down on Melanie. She's got. Oh, all right. So Melanie, I don't know if this is you or your evil twin who's now back in this room, or she's gone. Oh no. Oh, no. Someone find Melanie. Someone drive to her house. She lives in Avon somewhere. Someone find her. She will come back, hopefully. All right. So I'm going to move on because that's what my brain is telling me to do. All right. My brain is telling me to do. Are you my brain? Yes. Because you were like, move on. Let's go. I thought you were saying stretch it out. Okay. Let's see here. Trying to find, all right. Ooh, I like this. So this was another one of the stories. Chapter 7. He talks about the difference between, like, someone was giving their view on Bill. So it sounds like a bad joke. Bill Clinton, Al Gore, and George W. Bush all walk into a room. And somebody gives their perception of, like, when Bill Clinton walks in a room, he wants this. When Al Gore walks in a room, he wants this. And when George W. walks in a room, he wants this. So I'm going to keep explaining this, and then I want to know what he says he thinks, what Father Greg thinks Jesus does. So they said, all right, so when Bill Clinton walks in a room, he wants everyone in the room to like him. When Al Gore walks in a room, he wants everyone to think he's right. And when George W. walks in a room, he wants everyone to know he's in charge. Okay. And just in case you were wondering, I'm a George W. When I walk in a room, I want everyone to know that I am in charge. And that is not true at all. All right. So, but he says all of those three things, which some of them might seem less nefarious than others. But if you're looking at, all of those things, you want everybody to like you, that's me. You want people to think you're right. You want people to know you're in charge. All three of those things are fear-based desires, according to Father Greg. What is his take on when Jesus walks to a room? What does he think Jesus does? And how does that change how you approach that idea? Does everybody know where we are? He loves
Jesus makes a beeline to the outcast.
Yeah.
He goes to the ones that really need him.
Yes. Thank you, Carol. So he loves them. He goes to the people that needs them, and he believes in them. And so once again, what is the difference? And you could put me in there. You could say, instead of Bill Clinton, you could say, Pastor Jeff walks in a room. He wants people to like him. Al Gore wants people to think he's right. George W. Bush wants people to know he's in charge. So I could put myself in that situation. I'm one of those three. What is the difference? What is the key difference? And it keeps coming back to, yes. So Rob and Heather, it's not for Jesus. The difference in Jesus's approach to those three people, or I think a lot of people, the difference to Jesus' approach is when he walks in the room, he's not thinking about what he wants to get from the room. He's thinking about the other people in the room. that is, he walks into a room and loves what he finds there. Now, if we look back at Spider with his wife and his 2 kids, when he walks into that kitchen and they're eating, does he walk into that room and want people to like him? Does he walk in that room and want people to think he's right? Does he walk in that room wanting people to know he's in charge? Or does he go in that room and just loves what he finds?
Goes in the room and loves what he finds. Because his wife even wants him to eat and he won't, because
Yeah.
he's enjoying the children eating.
Yeah. So that's when we see these examples, for me at least, when I see these examples, that's what's so beautiful and what stands out. You know, the story of Spider, and why I think Father Greg lifts it up, is because you have these people that are in these various moments in their lives. At that point in time, when he does that, he is doing what we are all called to do. He is imitating Jesus at that very moment. As we talked about last week, he was, you know, Jesus in an apron, like that one waitress. You know, he's not focused on himself, he's focused on them. And then the next paragraph, to where we just were, about you know, Father Greg says again, his ways aren't our ways, but they sure could be. And then he makes a really direct point that I want to see what your guys' thoughts are on it. He says, so this is after the story about the Bill Clinton, Al Gore, George Bush. So the next paragraph starts with, we have grown accustomed to think that loving as God does is hard. We think it's about moral strain and obligation. We presume it requires a spiritual muscularity of which we are not capable, a layering of burden on top of sacrifice, with a side order of guilt. Do you think it's easy to love as God loves? Anybody?
No, it isn't easy.
There you are. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Dale. Becky's like, he is right. It's definitely not easy to love. Yeah, it's not easy at all. But and so we build up. I can't tell you how many times in my mind I've built up, well, yeah, but that's Jesus. That was Jesus doing that. That's not me. I'm not Jesus, which I am the first and last person to tell you that. And we should all say that. However, what do we think? What do you think Father Greg's point is here? Do you think he believes it's as hard to love people as God loves as we make it out to be?
No, I think we have to be more accepting and more tolerant of others. And more open to the differences that we all have.
Right. Right. Do you think it changes? So this has popped in my head. Do you think it changes if Spider walks into that kitchen? They're sitting down at the table and they're halfway through the meal. And one of his sons goes, "This food is crap. I didn't want this for dinner tonight. I wanted this instead." Do you think that changes? I mean, this is purely hypothetical. But I mean, when I envision that story of Spider spending that time with them while they're eating, I picture kind of like a movie moment where like they're all sitting around smiling at each other, just loving the food, and just holding each other's hands in the middle of it. And it's like, when does that ever happen? Like when I don't think if I get muted all of a sudden, you're going to know that I was censored here. I'm looking over at my wife, who's lovingly expecting me to say something that she greatly approves of. So when we know, and if this has happened to you, we know, like with our kids, when we get into a car with our kids, I can't tell you how many trips we've taken, or like mini trips we've taken, where we don't get out of the driveway before somebody has yelled, or gotten upset with somebody else. It's like, well, I want to put on my music or do this or do that. And then we're just like, oh my gosh, why can't we just get along? So if instead of it being this Norman Rockwell-ish painting of a kitchen that he's going into what, once again, dictates how Spider perceives everything that's going on in that space.
I think two people can look at the same situation,
Mhm.
and based on their experiences in life, have completely different opinions of what they're looking at,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Yeah. So if he is grateful for his family, whose choice is it that he is grateful?
Whose
Who determines-
choice?
Who determines whether he's grateful?
Yeah, Spider.
Yeah, spiders. Yeah. And so that's what we were saying, Dale, earlier when you were like, man, if everybody behaved this way, if everyone agreed, there will be a much better place. What becomes difficult is when we choose to live that way and then somebody throws a wrench into it. Because if we love, Jesus talks about this, I've heard it from him a few times. If we just love the situations that are loving, the family is just super happy and content, that's great. But what is that more so, that's when it's easy to love. Loving when it's not easy to love is the real measure of how inclusive we are, how much we love, how much we're willing. Because once again, if we're viewing it from I'm being so loving because I'm being self-sacrificing, then the focus is back on me. I'm being self-sacrificing, I'm being loving. But if the focus is on the other, that changes the equation. It doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions and that, if your kid is doing something or if you're doing something, people can't be corrected. But it's just something that I thought of with, we have to make that decision over and over and over again. And I don't know where, and somebody can help me with this if they want. I don't know if it's in the Catechism or if it's in one of Luther's other writings, but mentioning something to the effect of, every day. So like we wake up and make the sign of the cross. And we do that as a remembrance of our baptism. That's a Lutheran thing. So if you don't like me making the sign of the cross, if you don't like making the sign of the cross, I understand there are plenty of Lutherans that don't, but just know that was a Luther thing. So make the sign of the cross, remember our baptism, because we daily die and rise in Christ. And many scholars that I've, encountered over the years, their writings would say, and it's not even a daily dying and rising, it's a moment by moment dying and rising, having to make that decision of, all right, in this moment, who am I going to be? Who am I going to follow? How am I going to choose to respond? But starting the day that way is good. Moving, Melissa, can I get a time check?
8:04.
8:04, glorious. All right, I'm moving forward. Ooh, this is great. I don't know what page it's on. I wish I could change this to know what page I was on. I'm on page, I think it's 158. So see if it's go to page 158. On your page 158, are there 3 little dots in the middle of the page somewhere? Yeah? Woohoo! All right, found out how to do that.
You found the chat.
Chat. Let me see. Chat. All right. God's love. Hard part is loving unconditionally. Bad feelings on drugs. Yeah, Pastor, that is the hard part. Saying I truly love you as you still do those things. That is loving is easier than liking. Yes. But liking, and this could be wrong. My gut reaction to that, since my mother wrote it, she's looking at me like, what was he going to say? Liking puts a focus on who? Who does liking put a focus on? Yep, me. Do I like what you're doing? whereas loving puts the focus on the other person. So yeah, I don't know. Some are easier than, yeah, I don't know. It's, and in the Greek and the Hebrew, they have multiple words for love, which dissects it even further, or digests a frog, if you were somebody from one of these stories. All right, so those three dots, under those three dots, page 158. Leon Dufour, a world-renowned Jesuit theologian and scripture scholar, a year before he died at 99, confided in a Jesuit who was caring for him. I have written so many books on God, but after all that, what do I really know? I think in the end, God is the person you're talking to, the one right in front of you. What are your thoughts on that? Anybody want to say anything more on that? Or how does it tie into other things? Or just tell me.
Well, God is everywhere.
God is everywhere.
I mean, there's no place you can go that he isn't.
Right. Yeah. And I think if we take that to the furthest, if we truly believe that, that's what changes things. And it makes it harder at times. Because then it really stretches our ability to love and like and all those different emotions and actions. If we really see God in all things, God can present himself through anyone or anything as he chooses. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. And with time purposes, I'm realizing I'm only going to make it to chapter 7. That's okay, because next week I'll do 2 chapters and we'll finish out that way. See how many pages are left in this one. All right. So who wants to give a little summary, talk about what happened with the owl? The owl that showed up. One, I think is amazing what the one person wanted to do when they saw the owl. Yeah. So they see the owl, page 160-ish.
160.
Yeah.
160. They took it as a sign from God because they never saw an owl very often.
Yeah. So kind of like Sue did with her question when she was in 6th grade. They see this owl as a sign from God. And so like Sue did, they turn to the person, he happens to be there, who they think, all right, if this is a sign from God, we know who we need to ask about this. And she says, oh, so special, appreciate it, protect it, don't destroy it, correct. So they turn to Father Greg and they say, obviously, this is a sign. What is the sign supposed to be telling us? And what does Father Greg say? Because he's a smartass like me. So what does he say? It's true. You can be a smartass and still speak the truth. It's just the way you say it. So they say, what is the sign? And he tells them what?
It's God saying to give up your weapons, love your enemies, and work for peace.
Yeah. Is that the answer they wanted?
No.
No. And was that really the sign? They say to him, like, you say that's the sign for everything. Like, that's every sign is that, and he's probably like, yeah, that means if you're asking me what God wants you to do, this is what you want. Or he talks about maybe in the next chapter, which I won't go too far into because we'll save it for next week. He talks in the next chapter, the idea of, the other sign ends up being them being around, some of the gangsters being around when one of the moms finds out that her son died at the hospital. They have to hear the mother's wails and cries. That's a sign. The owl is just a little bit different in that. So let's go in our perception, page 162. Page 162, thank you, Barb. So it goes, it's an essential tenet of Buddhism that we can begin to change the world by first changing how we look at the world. And this is a great story. I'd never heard this before. One, because I'm not well versed in Vatican II history. The Vatican II Council Fathers simply decided to change the opening words of their groundbreaking encyclical, Gaudium et Spes. Originally, it read, speaking of the world, the grief and the anguish. Then they just decided to cross out those words and famously inserted instead, the joy and the hope. And he talks about from their decision to go from the grief. If you're talking about the world, if I were to say, all right, I'm going to write an article about the state of the world right now, and this was Vatican II, so this was, I think, in the 60s. But if I did it today, if I told everybody here, hey, I'm going to write an article on the state of the world, and I'm going to open up the article with the words, the grief and the anguish, would anybody here say, those words don't apply to today? Or would you say, yeah, no, I get that, the grief and the anguish, that makes sense? So if I instead told you, I'm going to start it out with the joy and the hope of the world today, is that something I could still do? So the difference, so Dale, the difference between those two, did anything, if it's still the same world, what's the difference in how I'm starting out that article?
One is more open, more positive.
One's open and positive, that is, yep. Dale, you were gonna.
That's what I was gonna say, that it's more, it is truly our hope. And
Right.
that's kind of the hope, that there will be joy. And so, yeah, it's a
Right.
true statement if you look at it that way.
Right. So what does he say? Jesus says we need to be reminded of it sometimes. Love still surrounding us. At the end of that paragraph, what does he say changed in the individuals writing that article? Instead of saying the grief and the anguish, instead saying the joy and the hope, what has changed? At the very, very last sentence.
They wanted to see the world differently.
Yep. The only thing that changed was they had to put on a whole new set of eyewear. So they were choosing, this is how we're going to see the world. Even though those two opening phrases almost seem like polar opposites, they could both be applied, and the only difference is how the person or the individual writing it is choosing to approach it. All right, we're wrapping up. I want to point out a few things as we wrap up. I love the phrase where the guy talks about, that's our oven. You guys are safe. If someone's fire alarm is going off at the same time, take shelter. This is what happens when I accidentally dump stuff in the oven, and then that stuff heats up, and then we didn't open the window. And Melissa's probably trying to surprise me at dinner. All right, so the guy falls and he's got all these scabs and marks on his body, and Father Greg's like, hey, what happened? He goes, oh, my bike was teaching me how to fly. I think that's brilliant. So that's a great way how to approach that. I thought it was an amazing story. I would have been this person. This would have been me, and I would have gotten yelled at by other adults. I have done this, where he's talking about going up to San Francisco, and he takes those two brothers with him. and they're freaking out as they're getting on the plane. And he says, instead of trying to calm them down, he just ratchets up, keeps going. And he's like, man, I think there's a crack in the wing. Or like, oh man, I don't know if it's supposed to be doing that, you know. And then they're like, what happens if we get into a crash? And he's like, all right, this is on page, I love this, page 165. He says, they could not be one bit more attentive. What do you do in the event of a crash? Are your seatbelts securely fastened? They check and nod earnestly. Okay, now lean forward. They're very compliant. No, you have to lean as far as you can. Is that as far as you can go? They are so low, I can barely register the nodding of their heads. Okay, say steady and calm as she goes. Now, if you can reach, kiss your asses goodbye, because that's all you're going to be able to do if this thing goes down. I think that's brilliant. So they're like, man, you have a problem. All right, we're done. This is the last part. All right, I'm going to put this, I'm going to say this, and then we'll end with this because it's the end of the chapter. I'm getting a signal to wrap up, and because it's a beautiful quote on page 166. Thomas Merton writes, no despair of ours can alter the reality of things or stain the joy of the cosmic dance, which is always there. We are invited to forget ourselves on purpose, cast our awful solemnity to the winds, and join in the general dance. The cosmic dance is simply always happening, and you'll want to be there when it happens. So just that beauty of taking a step back from ourselves and realizing that this creation that God created for us to find enjoyment, that's happening. And even in our horrible moments that are truly horrible, if we step back from ourselves, realize that the beauty and everything is still going on, and we can choose whether or not we want to be a part of it. Okay, well, the fire alarm is typically my notice at home to know that something should be stopped. And that's how we set alarms around here. We get everybody involved. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back doing this again next week. I'll send out another email with another Zoom invite for next week's meeting. If you happen to run into anybody at church who wasn't able to be here tonight, please let them know. We'll be doing this again, and I will see you all soon. And thank you for your prayers. Continue to pray for Sue and for Carol as well, that they can get back at it